In the heart of the wilderness, a lone Mustang, battered and bleeding, stumbles into view. His eyes, filled with desperation, meet a stranger's against all odds. This injured creature does something no one expects. He asks for help. What follows is a story so raw, so emotional, it will leave you in tears. Stay with us to uncover a journey of survival, resilience, and the bond that changes everything. The early morning sun cast long shadows over the rugged terrain. As Hannah Williams adjusted the strap of her backpack, a wildlife biologist in her late 30s, she was no stranger to the Colorado wilderness, where she spent most of her days studying the movement of wild Mustangs. Today was no different. At least that's what she thought as she trekked toward the river valley, her boots crunching over the dry grass as she rounded a bend. A faint noise caught her attention. She froze, tilting her head to listen. It wasn't the usual rustle of leaves or the distant calls of birds. This sound was different, soft, broken, almost like a cry. Her brow furrowed as she scanned the area. There, in the distance, a figure emerged. At first, it looked like nothing, more than a shadow against the golden backdrop of the sun. But as Hannah squinted, her breath caught in her throat. It was a horse, a Mustang, but something was wrong. The animal limped toward her, its movements slow and labored. Its chestnut coat was marred by streaks of dirt and blood, and one of its front legs dragged slightly as it moved. Hannah's heart clenched. She had seen her fair share of injured wildlife, but there was something about the way this Mustang looked at her, directly, almost pleadingly, that stopped her in her tracks. "Hey boy," she whispered, taking a cautious step forward. The Mustang froze, its ears flicking back, nostrils flaring as it assessed her. Hannah raised her hands slowly. Palms out. "It's okay, I'm not going to hurt you." The horse didn't move for a long moment. Then, to her astonishment, it took a shaky step toward her. Hannah dropped to a crouch, her heart pounding. She could see now that the Mustang's leg was badly swollen, and there was a deep gash along its side. "You're hurt," she murmured, her voice soft and steady. "But you're going to be okay. I promise." Reaching into her backpack, she pulled out a small first aid kit she always carried for emergencies. The horse watched her carefully, its dark eyes filled with a mix of fear and desperation. Hannah worked slowly, speaking to the Mustang in soothing tones as she approached. "You're a brave one, aren't you? Coming all the way here like this." The horse flinched as she reached out, but it didn't back away. Hannah's fingers brushed against its coat, and she felt the rapid rise and fall of its chest beneath her hand. She started by cleaning the gash on its side, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The horse stood still, its body trembling slightly as she worked. "Almost done," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're doing great." When she finished, Hannah stepped back to assess the situation. The Mustang needed more help than she could give out here. Its leg would need attention, and it was clear from its condition that it hadn't eaten properly in days. But how could she get it to safety? Her cabin was miles away, and the idea of trying to lead an injured wild horse through the rough terrain was daunting. Still, as she looked into the Mustang's eyes, she knew she couldn't leave it behind. After a moment of thought, she pulled a rope from her pack and fashioned a makeshift halter. The Mustang tensed as she slipped it over its head but didn't resist. "That's it," she said, giving the rope a gentle tug. "Let's get you out of here." The journey back was slow and grueling. The Mustang limped heavily, pausing every few steps. To catch its breath, Hannah stayed by its side, offering quiet encouragement as they made their way across the uneven ground. By the time they reached her cabin, the sun was dipping low in the sky, casting long shadows over the trees. Hannah led the Mustang to a small paddock near the barn where she had kept rescue animals before. She filled a bucket with water and placed it in front of the horse, watching as it drank deeply. "You're safe now," she said softly, leaning against the fence. "I don't know where you came from, but you're not alone anymore." As the Mustang settled into the paddock, Hannah felt a sense of relief wash over her. But she knew this was just the beginning. Whatever had happened to this horse, it had fought to survive, and now it was up to her to help it heal. The early morning sunlight streamed through the cracks in the barn walls, casting golden beams over the Mustang as it stood in the makeshift paddock. Hannah watched from the porch, sipping her coffee and mentally preparing for the day ahead. She had spent most of the night checking on the horse, ensuring it was as comfortable as possible in its unfamiliar surroundings. The Mustang's condition weighed heavily on her mind. The deep gash along its side needed more than just a quick cleaning, and the swelling in its leg hadn't gone down. But what troubled her most was the horse's demeanor. There was a sadness in its eyes, an exhaustion that went beyond physical pain. "This isn't going to be easy," she murmured to herself, setting her coffee mug down and grabbing her veterinary kit. As Hannah approached the paddock, the Mustang lifted its head, its ears flicking toward her. The morning light highlighted the horse's chestnut coat, marred by dirt and dried blood. Hannah noticed how the Mustang's stance remained uneven, its injured leg bearing little weight. "Good morning, boy," she said softly. Leaning against the fence, the Mustang snorted, a puff of white breath visible in the cool air. She crouched by the gate, carefully opening it and stepping inside. The Mustang didn't move but kept its eyes locked on her. Hannah knew better than to rush. Wild horses were unpredictable, and this one was already in a vulnerable state. "It's just me," she said gently, holding up her hands to show she wasn't a threat. Hannah spent the next hour working on the horse's injuries. She cleaned the gash again, applying an antibiotic ointment to prevent infection, and wrapped its leg in a clean bandage. The Mustang flinched a few times, but didn't resist, as if it understood she was trying to help. "You're a fighter," she said, her voice steady and calm. "Whatever happened to you out there, you didn't give up." The thought sent a pang through her chest. She had seen injured animals before, but there was something different about this Mustang. It wasn't just the severity of its wounds, it was the fact that it had sought her out, as if knowing she could help. Later that afternoon, Hannah called a local veterinarian, Dr. Keller, who specialized in large animals. "I've got a wild Mustang here," she explained over the phone. "He's injured, deep gash on his side, and his front leg is swollen. I've done what I can, but he needs more care." Dr. Keller agreed to stop by the following morning, but his tone was cautious. "If it's wild, it may not let us do much," he warned. Hannah glanced out the window at the Mustang, now resting in the shade of the paddock. "He's different," she said quietly. "I think he knows we're trying to help." That evening, Hannah sat by the paddock, watching the Mustang as it grazed. She had placed a pile of hay and a bucket of fresh water nearby, but the horse only nibbled at the food, its appetite still weak. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The Mustang lifted its head, its dark eyes meeting hers for a moment. Hannah felt an unspoken connection, a bond forged through mutual trust and understanding. The next morning, Dr. Keller arrived in his truck, parking near the barn. He was a tall, seasoned man in his early 50s with years of experience working with horses. As he approached the paddock, he whistled softly. "That's a fine-looking Mustang," he said, eyeing the horse. "He's been through hell," Hannah replied, leading him to the gate. "But he's holding on." Dr. Keller spent the next hour examining the Mustang, checking its leg and assessing the gash. "He's lucky," he said finally. "The leg isn't broken, just a bad sprain, and the cut will heal with proper care." Hannah felt a wave of relief. "So he'll be okay with time?" "Yes," Dr. Keller said, "but he's going to need rest and consistent care. Wild horses are tough, but even they have their limits." As the veterinarian packed up his tools, he glanced at Hannah. "You've got your work cut out for you," he said with a wry smile. "But if anyone can handle it, it's you." Hannah watched as Dr. Keller drove away, then turned back to the Mustang. The horse was standing near the fence, its ears flicking toward her. "You heard him," she said with a smile. "We've got some work to do." The Mustang snorted softly, and Hannah took it as a sign of agreement. Together, they had a long road ahead, but she was determined to see it through. The first few days after the veterinarian's visit were slow but promising. Hannah devoted every moment of her free time to the Mustang, carefully tending to its wounds and monitoring its recovery. The swelling in its leg had begun to subside, and the gash on its side was healing steadily. However, she knew that physical recovery was only part of the battle. The Mustang was still wary of her. It stood at a distance when she approached and flinched at sudden movements. Hannah understood. The horse had every reason to be cautious. Whatever it had endured before finding its way to her had likely left deep scars, not just on its body but on its spirit. One crisp morning, Hannah decided to take a different approach. Armed with a bucket of oats, she entered the paddock and sat down a few feet from the horse. Instead of moving toward it, she stayed still, her posture relaxed and unthreatening. "All right, boy," she said softly. "I'm not going to push you. You come to me when you're ready." The Mustang stood at the far side of the paddock, its ears twitching as it watched her. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, slowly, it took a tentative step forward. Hannah stayed perfectly still, her heart pounding as the horse closed the distance between them inch by inch. When it finally reached her, it lowered its head, sniffing cautiously at the bucket of oats in her hand. "There you go," she murmured, her voice gentle and steady. "See, I'm not so bad." The horse took a small bite, its movements careful and deliberate. For Hannah, it was a breakthrough, a small but significant step toward earning its trust. Over the next few days, their bond began to grow. The Mustang allowed her to approach without flinching and even started following her around the paddock. Hannah named him Rusty, inspired by the reddish tint of his chestnut coat. "Rusty suits you," she said one afternoon as she brushed his coat. The horse stood still, his eyes half closed, as if enjoying the attention. For Hannah, these moments felt like a gift. She had worked with animals her entire life, but there was something different about Rusty. His resilience, his willingness to trust despite everything he had been through, inspired her in ways she couldn't put into words. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Hannah stood by the paddock fence, watching Rusty graze. Her mind drifted back to the day he had appeared, limping and broken. She couldn't help but wonder where he had come from and what had led him to her. The next morning, she decided to investigate. She drove to the nearby town, stopping at the local feed store where ranchers and horse owners often gathered. "Anyone missing a Mustang?" she asked the group of men gathered near the counter. One of them, an older man with a weathered face, shook his head. "Not that I've heard of." "Why?" Hannah explained how Rusty had stumbled onto her property, injured and desperate. The men listened intently, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. "You might want to check the canyon trails," one of them suggested. "We've had reports of illegal Mustang traps out that way." Hannah's stomach turned. She had heard of people setting up traps to capture wild horses for profit, often in cruel and inhumane ways. The thought of Rusty being one of their victims filled her with anger and determination. That afternoon, Hannah drove to the canyon trails with a heavy heart. The rugged terrain was dotted with sharp rocks and sparse vegetation, a harsh environment for any animal. As she walked along the trail, she spotted signs of disturbance, hoof prints in the dirt, broken branches, and eventually a crude trap made of metal fencing and ropes. Her suspicions were confirmed. Rusty had likely escaped from one of these traps, but not without suffering in the process. When she returned home, she found Rusty waiting by the fence, his ears pricking forward at the sight of her. Hannah approached him slowly, her hand brushing against his neck. "You're safe now," she said softly. "No one's ever going to hurt you." Again, the discovery of the trap strengthened Hannah's resolve. She contacted local authorities and wildlife organizations, reporting what she had found. She also began researching ways to protect the wild Mustangs in her area, determined to ensure that Rusty's story wouldn't be repeated. As the days turned into weeks, Rusty continued to heal, both physically and emotionally. His once cautious demeanor gave way to a gentle curiosity, and he began seeking out Hannah's presence, nickering softly whenever she approached. For Hannah, every small sign of progress felt like a victory. She knew that they still had a long road ahead, but for the first time, she felt hopeful. The first rays of morning sunlight bathed the paddock in a warm glow as Rusty paced along the fence, his chestnut coat glimmering with health that had been absent just weeks ago. Hannah watched from the porch, a mug of coffee in her hand, a faint smile tugging at her lips. The progress he'd made was undeniable. His limp was gone, his wounds had healed, and the spark in his eyes had returned. But something lingered in her mind. the injustice of what he had endured before finding her that afternoon, as she tended to Rusty. She couldn't shake the memory of the crude trap she had discovered in the canyon. The sight of it had haunted her, and the thought that others like Rusty might still be out there weighed heavily on her heart. "You're one of the lucky ones," she said softly, running a brush along his side. Rusty turned his head toward her, his ears flicking as if he understood. Hannah knew she couldn't stand by and do nothing. She began reaching out to local wildlife organizations, sharing the details of her discovery and asking for their support. Some offered resources, others promised to spread the word, but many cautioned her about the challenges of confronting such a widespread problem. "You're taking on a lot," her friend Sarah said over the phone one evening. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Hannah glanced out the window at Rusty, who was grazing peacefully in the paddock. "I don't have a choice," she replied. "If I don't do something, who will?" The next morning, Hannah drove back to the canyon trails with a group of volunteers and a representative from a local Mustang rescue organization. They spent hours combing the area, documenting evidence of illegal trapping and dismantling what traps they could find. As they worked, Hannah's thoughts kept returning to Rusty. She wondered how long he had been trapped, how far he had traveled to find her, and what had given him the strength to keep going. Despite his injuries, by the end of the day, they had uncovered several traps, some still functional, others abandoned and rusting. The representative from the rescue organization assured Hannah that the evidence would be turned over to the authorities, but she knew their work was far from over. Back at the ranch, Rusty greeted Hannah with a soft nicker as she approached the paddock. She leaned against the fence, her fingers brushing against the wood. "You've been through so much," she said quietly, "but you didn't give up, and neither will the first." Over the next few weeks, Hannah threw herself into the fight to protect the Mustangs. She organized community meetings, shared Rusty's story on social media, and even spoke at a local town hall about the importance of preserving the wild horse population. Rusty became the face of her campaign, his story inspiring others to join the cause. People from all walks of life reached out to offer their support: ranchers, animal lovers, even children who sent drawings of Rusty with messages of hope. One afternoon, as Hannah was working in the barn, she heard the sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway. She stepped outside to find a truck pulling a horse trailer. A middle-aged man in a wide-brimmed hat climbed out, his expression serious but kind. "Are you Hannah Williams?" he asked, extending a hand. "I am," she replied, shaking his hand. "And you are?" "Name's Tom Carter," he said. "I run a sanctuary for Mustangs a few hours south of here. Heard about what you're doing, and I wanted to help." Tom explained that his sanctuary had space for more horses and that he was working on a project to rehabilitate injured Mustangs and release them back into the wild. "I'd like to take Rusty off your hands," he said. "Not permanently, just for a while. He could help show the others that there's life after all they've been through." Hannah hesitated, glancing toward the paddock where Rusty was grazing. The thought of parting with him, even temporarily, tugged at her heart, but she knew Tom was right. Rusty's resilience could inspire others just as it had inspired her. After a long pause, she nodded. "If it's what's best for him, then yes, but I want to be involved. I want to see this through." Tom smiled. "I wouldn't have it any other way." The next day, as Tom loaded Rusty into the trailer, Hannah stood by the fence, her emotions a mix of pride and sadness. She placed a hand on Rusty's neck, her voice steady but soft. "You're going to do great things, boy, I know it." Rusty nickered softly, his dark eyes meeting hers one last time before stepping into the trailer. As the truck pulled away, Hannah felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. This wasn't the end of their journey, it was just the beginning. The drive to Tom Carter's sanctuary felt like a long goodbye. Hannah followed the truck closely, her heart heavy as she watched Rusty's silhouette through the slats of the trailer. The chestnut Mustang had been her companion through weeks of healing, a constant reminder of resilience and survival. Letting him go, even temporarily, felt like losing a piece of herself. But as they turned onto the long dirt road leading to the sanctuary, she knew that this was just another step in their shared journey of hope and healing. Hannah's apprehension began to ease as the sprawling land stretched as far as the eye could see. Dotted with rolling hills, shaded groves, and open fields, horses graze freely in large paddocks, their movements unencumbered by fences or confinement. Tom's sanctuary was more than she had imagined. It was a place where Rusty could thrive. Tom pulled the truck to a stop near a large corral, stepping out and motioning for Hannah to join him. "This is where we'll start," he said. Opening the trailer gate, Rusty backed out slowly, his ears flicking as he took in his new surroundings. Hannah stood by his side, her hand resting gently on his neck. "It's okay, boy," she murmured. "You're safe here." Tom watched the interaction with a small smile. "He trusts you," he said. "That's rare for a Mustang with his history." Hannah nodded, her gaze fixed on Rusty. "We've been through a lot together. He's taught me as much as I've helped him." Tom led Rusty into the corral where two other Mustangs waited. One was a sleek black mare with a scar across her shoulder, and the other was a young bay stallion, his energy barely contained as he pawed at the ground. "Introducing him to others like him will help," Tom explained. "They'll form a herd, and he'll regain the instincts that make Mustangs so remarkable." Rusty hesitated at first, his head held high as he assessed the other horses. The mare stepped forward, her movements cautious but curious. After a moment, she nickered softly, and Rusty responded with a low whinny. Hannah watched in awe as the two horses began to circle each other, their communication silent but profound. "It's like they understand each other," she said. "They do," Tom replied. "Horses communicate through body language and energy. They don't need words. They just know." Over the next few days, Hannah stayed at the sanctuary, working alongside Tom to help Rusty adjust. She watched as he bonded with the other Mustangs, his confidence growing with each passing day. One afternoon, as she leaned against the fence, Tom joined her, his arms crossed. "You've got a gift," he said. Hannah raised an eyebrow. "A gift with horses," Tom clarified. "You understand them in a way most people don't. They trust you because you see them for who they are, not just as animals but as individuals." Hannah felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had always loved animals, but Rusty had awakened something deeper, a purpose she hadn't realized she needed. On the 5th day, Tom approached her with a proposal. "You've seen what we do here," he said, "the work we're trying to accomplish. I could use someone like you, someone who cares, who understands." Hannah blinked, caught off guard. "Are you offering me a job?" Tom chuckled. "More like a partnership. I want you to help me expand this place, bring in more horses, and share their stories. Rusty's story has already inspired so many people. Imagine what we could do with a whole herd." Hannah looked out at the sanctuary, at Rusty grazing peacefully. With his new herd, the idea of leaving her small ranch was daunting, but the thought of being part of something bigger, of giving other horses the same chance Rusty had been given, filled her with excitement. "I'll need some time to think," she said finally. Tom nodded. "Take all the time you need, but just know you've already made a difference." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Hannah sat by the paddock, watching Rusty under the fading light. The chestnut Mustang had come so far from the injured, desperate creature that had stumbled onto her property. Now he was a leader, a symbol of hope and resilience. Hannah realized that she couldn't walk away, not from Rusty, not from the sanctuary, and not from the opportunity to create something meaningful. The next morning, she found Tom in the barn, sorting through supplies. "I've made my decision," she said, her voice steady. Tom turned, his expression curious. "And I'm in," she said with a smile. "Let's build this place together." Tom grinned, extending a hand. "Welcome to the team," he said as Hannah shook his hand. She felt a sense of purpose settle over her. Rusty had led her here, not just to help him but to find her own path together. They were creating a legacy, one that would change the lives of countless horses and the people who cared for them. The weeks that followed marked a transformation, not just for Rusty, but for Hannah as well. Settling into life at the sanctuary, she found herself thriving in the routines and challenges of caring for the Mustangs. The once injured and fearful horse that had stumbled into her life was now a leader among his herd. His presence commanding and calm, Rusty had become the heart of the sanctuary, and his journey inspired everyone who crossed paths with him. One crisp autumn morning, Hannah stood at the edge of the pasture, watching as Rusty led the other horses to a shaded grove by the creek. The sanctuary was alive with movement, volunteers mending fences, children on field trips learning about wild Mustangs, and new rescues settling into their temporary paddocks. Tom walked up beside her, holding a clipboard. "We've got 3 more horses arriving this afternoon," he said, to mares and a stallion. "Found them wandering near the canyon. Same story, likely escaped from traps." Hannah's chest tightened. The discovery of more wild horses in need was bittersweet. On one hand, it meant their sanctuary was making a difference. On the other, it was a stark reminder of the cruelty still happening beyond their fences. "We'll make room," she said firmly. "Whatever it takes, we'll take care of them." Tom nodded, his respect for Hannah growing with each passing day. "You're a natural at this," he said. "I don't know how I managed without you." Hannah smiled, her gaze never leaving Rusty. "I couldn't have done any of this without him," she said softly. As the day wore on, the sanctuary buzzed with activity. The new arrivals were unloaded from the trailer, their eyes wide with fear as they stepped onto unfamiliar ground. Hannah worked alongside Tom and the volunteers to ease their transition, speaking in soft tones and offering them hay and water. Rusty, curious as ever, stood by the fence, watching the newcomers with interest. One of the mares, a slender gray with a scar across her flank, approached the fence cautiously. Rusty extended his neck, nickering softly, and the mare seemed to relax under his calm presence. "He's got away with them," Tom remarked, leaning on the fence beside Hannah. "He knows what they've been through," she replied. "It's like he's telling them they're safe now." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sanctuary in warm golden light, Hannah gathered the volunteers by the barn. They stood in a circle, their faces lit with a mix of exhaustion and pride after a long day of work. "I just want to say thank you," Hannah began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Every one of you has played a part in making the sanctuary what it is. It's not just about saving horses, it's about giving them a chance to heal, to trust again, and to show the world what they're capable of." She paused, glancing toward the pasture where Rusty stood silhouetted against the fading light. "Rusty reminded me of something important. Even when the odds are stacked against you, there's always a way forward. And sometimes it's the ones who've been hurt the most who have the most to teach us." The group erupted into applause, their spirits lifted by Hannah's words. That night, Hannah sat by the paddock, her notebook open on her lap. She had begun documenting the stories of each horse at the sanctuary, hoping to one day compile them into a book that could raise awareness about wild Mustangs and their struggles. Rusty approached the fence, his ears pricking forward as he watched her. Hannah smiled, reaching out to stroke his neck. "You've done so much already," she said softly. "But we've got so much more to do." Months turned into years, and the sanctuary continued to grow with each new arrival. Hannah and Tom worked tirelessly to ensure the horses received the care they needed. Rusty remained at the heart of it all, his story inspiring countless visitors and donors who helped sustain the sanctuary's mission. One day, a young boy visiting with his family approached Hannah by the paddock. "Is that Rusty?" he asked, pointing to the chestnut Mustang grazing nearby. Hannah nodded. The boy's eyes widened. "I read about him online. He's a hero, isn't he?" Hannah chuckled, her heart swelling with pride. "He is, and you can be a hero too, just by caring for animals like him." The boy grinned, his excitement contagious. Moments like this reminded Hannah of why she had chosen this path, why Rusty had chosen her. As the sun set on another day at the sanctuary, Hannah stood by the fence, watching Rusty lead his herd toward the creek. The air was cool, the sky painted in shades of pink and orange, and the sounds of the horses filled the silence. "You saved me as much as I saved you," she whispered, her voice carrying on the breeze. Rusty lifted his head, his dark eyes meeting hers for a moment before he turned to rejoin his herd. Hannah smiled, knowing that their journey wasn't just about survival. It was about creating a legacy of hope, freedom, and second chances. Years passed, and the sanctuary became a beacon of hope for Mustangs in need. What started as a safe haven for a single injured horse had grown into a thriving refuge, housing dozens of wild Mustangs who had been rescued from traps, abuse, and neglect. Each horse had a story, but none resonated as deeply as Rusty's. Rusty, now the undeniable leader of the herd, carried himself with a quiet confidence that inspired everyone who met him. His journey from the brink of death to a life of freedom symbolized everything the sanctuary stood for: resilience, courage, and the transformative power of trust. Hannah often reflected on the day Rusty stumbled onto her property. At the time, she thought she was the one saving him, but as she stood by the paddock, watching Rusty nuzzle a young foal who had just been rescued, she realized how much he had saved her. Rusty had given her purpose, a mission greater than herself, and a community of people who shared her passion for protecting these majestic creatures. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the fields in hues of gold, Hannah leaned against the fence, a soft smile on her face. Rusty lifted his head, his dark eyes meeting hers, and for a moment, it felt as though he was saying thank you. Rusty's story reminds us that even in our darkest moments, hope can shine through. If this tale of resilience and trust touched your heart, help us spread the message by subscribing to our channel, liking this video, and sharing it with someone who loves inspiring stories. Together, we can create a world where every animal gets the second chance they deserve. Join us in making a difference.